Waiting for the start. So, hello everyone. Welcome to our monthly InfoSec seminar organized by the Information System Security and Assurance Management Department in Mahalshan School of Management. Today, we are pleased to have Parul Khanna to give us an interesting talk about bridging the gap, mitigating cyber risks in the insurance sector. Parul is a seasoned cybersecurity professional with a specialization in risk management, incident response, cloud security, and software engineering. She has master's degree in information system security management from Concordia University of Edmonton and holds CISSP, CCSP, CISA, CISM, CRISC, CDB, SE, and CCSK designations. Previously, Parul has worked as a core team member of Cybersecurity Operations Center at one of Canada's Big Five banks. She is a subject matter expert on risk assessment, security control improvement, and security solution. In addition to her professional career, Parul has published a research paper on doxing at an international conference on information security, privacy, and forensics held in Montreal. Parul has also served as a board member for the ISC 2 Toronto chapter. She enjoys mentoring aspiring professionals and is a course instructor for cybersecurity courses at a university based in Toronto. Parul also loves to volunteer her time for the women in cybersecurity community and is a passionate public speaker at cybersecurity conferences. Thank you, Parul, for being with us today, and thank you all for attending this seminar.
Great, yeah.
Now, Parul.
Yes, thank you, Professor Islam. So I will just skip this introduction part. So essentially, the next 1 hour, we are going to take a look deep dive into. I'm going to provide a high-level overview of what an insurance sector is, and then primarily focus on what makes an insurance or financial sector so vulnerable or such a prime target for the cyber attacks, right? The takeaways, the learning objectives for today's discussion essentially would be how we can mitigate, how we can reduce the impact of those cyber attacks, like what are the risks what are the cyber risks that the insurance industry is subjected to, how we can mitigate this, and then what are essentially the security controls that we should be having in place, right? Essentially like best practices as well as security controls. I'll also be taking one of the case studies, which is actually like quite trending. It's think about it like very similar to artificial intelligence. So we have the concept of DevSecOps. So this is something very trending, and I would be focusing on what are the security controls, what do we understand by DevSecOps, and then how exactly this is helping the insurance industry to address those cyber risks. And in the end, I will perhaps leave 10-15 minutes for the audience to answer their questions and entertain like comments or the feedback. So an insurance sector, like we all have insurances, right, on a day-to-day basis. Like when it comes to your health insurance, your life insurance, or your, let's just say it could be as simple as your auto insurance or your tenant insurance. So when we have these kinds of insurances, what we are essentially sharing with the organization, with the company that's providing that insurance is large amount of our PII data. It could be financial data too, or it could be our health information, like especially if we are taking health insurance. So this particular data, this classification of data is highly confidential, which means that if an imposter gets to a PII data or gets access to our social insurance numbers, they could easily fake our identity, compromise our identity, and carry illegit actions on the basis of fake identity, right? We have been hearing like frauds, and we have been hearing stories about all these things happening. So one of the things that makes an insurance sector or an insurance industry such a prime target is essentially because they deal or they process with large amounts of highly confidential, which is your PII as well as your financial data, right? The second aspect to it is, so yeah, that's the first, the PII. The second aspect to it is, let's just say if we are having some retirement plans, or if we are dealing with an insurance industry that deals or sells retirement plans, right? As part of that, they are connected, or we tend to link it to our financial institutions, right? So when there is interconnectivity, like whenever there is the term interconnectivity or internet, we have, what we are essentially doing is the attack surface or the threat surface is considerably increased at that point, right? A malicious person, a malicious imposter, a fraudster, he can definitely access to our PII from different methods, from like different through different channels, right? So whenever there is linkage, interconnectivity, that essentially means that yes, there could be loopholes, there could be more vulnerabilities that could be exploited, and that could be leveraged by a hacker to perhaps access our highly confidential data. Data aggregators. So what this essentially means is, like, I share my information, let's just say with my insurance company. Now my insurance company has got data aggregators, or which in turn means it's sharing information with third parties or subsequent other parties, so as to have those data analytics and kind of like analyze which products are like in demand in the market and which products are not. So that my information is being shared with the other parties, and how that information is being used, that also poses a risk, because we, like, no one has vetted, or we aren't sure what are the security controls on the other end, like on the third parties or the fourth parties, or where these data aggregators is actually giving access giving access to whom for this kind of data. So that's the third aspect to it. Now, outsourcing to third parties or supply chain. So this is also important. And what this means is, like, usually an insurance industry on a day-to-day basis, they do have a numerous number of, like, they deal with the third parties vendors, and it could either be in the form that they are engaged with them as part of their stakeholders to do their daily, like, day-to-day businesses. They are sending files to them, right, for analytics purposes, or it could be that a part of their web applications or a part of their websites has been outsourced to the third party so that they could actually do the maintenance and upkeep for it. So either ways, when we are sharing, when we are handling over our data to any of these third parties, to any of these outsiders, right, like the fourth parties, this poses a risk because we haven't really, like, have we done enough vetting of the security controls on their end? Are we sure that our data is still in, like, safe hands? And the same goes when, let's just say, we are migrating our highly confidential data to the cloud. The same thing is applicable there. And last but not the least, lack of security training amongst the users, right? So for instance, a user might get a phishing link, might get scammed in the form of, like, social engineering. And if they click on that link, so nothing is preventing the hacker to gain access to their highly confidential data. So it's quite imperative to, even, like, because that's what we say, like, cybersecurity is everyone's job. So it's quite important that even if we do have the necessary security controls in place, we do want to make our employees, our customers, and everyone aware that the basic about the cybersecurity training and how it's important, like, not to click on any phishing links, not to get scammed, and then not to share their personal information. So variety of factors ends up, like, all these things leads up to an insurance sector being a prime target, right, for cybersecurity attacks. Now, talking about the risks that are faced by an insurance industry, again, there is a huge list of the risks that are actually applicable for an insurance industry, but I have nailed it down to, let's just say, the top 5 or 6 risks that we know that, yes, insurance industry is vulnerable to. So the first of it is ransomware. So essentially, what this means is a hacker gets access to your data, encrypts it, and then demands a ransomware so that they could actually give you another key to decrypt your data. So this is one of the things, like, in the whole purview of things, you don't have access to your data unless, like, there is a backup in place. Now, with the threat landscape evolving, with the number of cyber attacks on the rise, and especially, like, with everything, like, we have been working from home in the pandemic, so the attack surface has increased considerably. So, and so do the techniques using which these attackers, they conduct a ransomware attack, right? So this is, like, clearly on the rise. And there was a research study which was carried out, and ransomware attacks have been, like, on the number one list when it comes to the attacks faced by the cyber by the insurance industry. So what can these attacks leads to? Obviously, there could be a case that you never get access to your data back, right? Like if there is a failure to pay that ransomware, they might just sell the data of highly confidential data on the dark web, and then there it is. There is a there's a good uh, business as well as reputational damage that comes associated once your company is in the news, and once we know that, yeah, it has been subjected to a ransomware attack, and then there has been a compromise of your the highly confidential data. So there is loss of customer trust, there is business as well as reputational damage. And then what it has eventually led to is that, because a company, insurance company, they do have to pay, like, let's just say if they are paying out of their pocket, like for the ransomware, right? What it has eventually led to is the increase in the number of like insurance premiums or the number of claims made by this organization. So basically, it's an indirect impact to the customers or the end users who are leveraging their products. So we see this whole hierarchy or the chain that builds up. But yes, ransomware attacks is on the rise. They have been like sophistication, they have used sophisticated techniques, and we have seen that, yes, in the past there have been business as well as reputational damage associated with it. Now, coming to yeah, so this is essentially a global view of I think it was taken from one of the studies that was done in like recently 2023 from the global ransomware attack report. So what it presents is the number of ransomware attacks across the globe that was encountered in 2022 as well as 2021. So if we talk about specific to North America, we see that insurance industries, like 46% of them, they have been subjected to ransomware attacks, right? And in 2021 this was 56%, which kind of the drop is explainable, knowing that, yes, like last year things were different because, yes, we were still like in the pandemic era, so that kind of like explains it. But yeah, this is just to give you an overview of where do the category of ransomware attacks falls into picture and what percentage of it does it actually contribute, right? Like especially if we are talking about North America. So if if we were to say like how do we protect against these ransomware attacks, right? Now there is a section that says we do need to have these mandatory security controls, and then there are like best practices. Obviously your training and awareness forms part of the best practices, but when it comes to the security controls, first things first is, do we have any loopholes or vulnerabilities within our organization that needs to be addressed, like especially if these fall into the category of critical medium, especially if we know that these vulnerabilities are on the client facing websites and have a potential of being exploited by a imposter, right, by a bad person. So one of the things is this, right? The second is, let's just say if the imposter does get to, if the fraudster, if the bad person does get access to our highly confidential PII data and they tend to encrypt it, do we have a backup in place? Or when was the last time we actually took our backup? When was the last time we actually tested our backup to ensure that, yes, it was running? That's another aspect to think about it, so that there is no business disruption, right? And we continue, like, especially if we are relying on that information to do our daily businesses, there is no business disruptions, right? Now, keeping your operating systems and software up to date with the latest patches, this go hand in hand with the, yeah, ensuring that there is no outstanding vulnerabilities in your applications, the software products that you are using, especially if it's like client facing. Maintaining up to date your antivirus software. So this is also important, just to ensure that you have the latest version, latest signatures updated there. And then most importantly, restricting the user's ability to download and install from any other website. So that's why we have like at the organization level, we do have trusted sources. We do have a repository where we say we tend to pull in the softwares from and we tend to install it, right? So it should be forbidden, like the company rules, especially concerning like the use of the internet. It should forbid for the users to just go on any site and then download it from there, because we don't know that if the site has been compromised, or if the application, the setup file in that particular website has been compromised, or if, let's just say, we tend to like install it, what exactly is the extent? Because if, let's just say, everything is connected, right? Like nothing is preventing the malware from spreading from my system to another systems, right? Another thing to note about here is, do our users have the ability to actually install something on their local devices or on their company devices? So that's also important. Practically speaking, there should not be the user should not have the ability to have an install, right? Like to perform the install. They should it should someone with the admin privileges should do that. And that's why there's the reason that, yes, we go to our help desk folks and they verify that yes, it's legit software, and they then kind of like do the installation for us. So that's important as well. And then last but not the least, again, this forms part of the user awareness training, that we do not want to have unsolicited web links in the emails, and we do not want to click on them or take action on them. So usually as part of like any organization, we are subjected to regular like these drill exercises where malicious links are sent. Well, not like malicious, but it tends to like make people more aware that yes, are you aware that this is like a phishing scam? Are you aware that this is a phishing link? Or are you geared towards that yes, this is a attack that has been just performed, to ensure that yes, you are kind of aware of the cybersecurity rules as well as the policies within the organization. Now, on the right side, this was one of the WannaCry. This was one of the ransomware attack which happened in 2017, quite a famous one. And then there was one in 2021 which goes by the name of Kisaya. So take a look into these, like do some self-reading, because these are like excellent examples of why an organization should be having robust security controls in place. And then because the damages involved, like the uh, ransom paid in these was like from millions for millions, right? So it's quite good to just look at the latest examples, the latest ransomware attacks that has been done, and then learn out of them. The next one that we have is your third party risks. So essentially, as an organization, yes, I do deal with my third parties. I do have vendors. I do have different stakeholders, right? A part of my business, I do share sensitive information with them, highly confidential information with them. Now, what is preventing that information from getting leaked or from falling into the hands of imposter? Do these third parties have enough security controls in their place? So that's one of the challenges, and that's one of the key things to keep in mind when essentially we are dealing with our third parties, right? And these third parties, necessarily they could vary from either your software vendors, your suppliers, your staffing agencies, your consultants, as well as your contractors, your software supply chain risk. So this is like increasing, like hugely increasing. And the only reason being that the product that we are using today, there are individual components to it, which means that there is a manufacturer, there is a distributor, there is a supplier, then there is a retailer, then there is a consumer, right? So there are risks associated with each of these components that actually leads up to the formation of your particular products. And each of these individual components, these are like part of your software supply chain, right? So it's quite important that you kind of like as an in an organization, if you are using third parties or if you are outsourcing your business to third parties, you kind of like vet their security controls, that what uh, do they have robust security posture? Like, are they fully compliant? And are we at the comfort level of saying that no, our data is not getting leaked or is not getting into the news the next day in the morning, right? So if we look at how do we manage third party risks, right? So essentially, within any organization, you do have a third party information risk management, like a third party risk management, which goes by the name of TPRN team setup, which essentially says ask the vendor the right set of questionnaires, the right set of checklist, and which gets into the evidence part of it to ensure that there are security controls in place. there is restricted access to the data. Like there is a data backup being taken. There is like logging and monitoring in place, right? So in case, let's just say, if that third party has outsourced a part of their business again to a fourth party, right? So that is something not within your hands to control that particular fourth party. What are the security controls in their hand, right? Like how do they deal with your data? So that's actually on the third party to do that part of vetting. So essentially, when it comes to outsourcing your business to a third party, you definitely want to have a comprehensive, exhaustive checklist which says, yes, these are the security controls that we need, and yes, this is the evidence that has been provided to make sure that yes, you do have a good security posture, right? So and essentially that thing on the circle on the right side, that essentially shows you the different, like on a very 20,000 feet view of what are the different components of a third party risk management program. So it starts from your planning phase. It starts actually from your, sorry, due diligence phase, right? Where essentially the teams engage and ask the questions, go through the questionnaires. And again, it could get very comprehensive, very daunting as well. Then comes the final contracting phase where you sign the contract, where you make sure that you have the necessary language set up within the contract if there are clauses that needs to be mentioned. The next part of it is vendor management, where essentially you are on let's just say doing the daily business with your particular third party or your vendor. And the finally is termination. Like should one of the important things to keep in mind is, let's just say if you have signed a contract for the next 10 years with any of the third parties, right? 2 years down the line, that third party encounters a breach and your reputation is, yeah, you don't want to deal further with them. So, do you have enough contractual clauses within your specified in your contract to ensure that you can get out of that particular 10-year agreement without much of financial implications? So, that's quite important to understand because usually, like when we are outsourcing or when we are engaging these third parties, this kind of happens in like for a long run period, which means like when I say long run, like anywhere between like more than 5 years or more than like 3 years for sure, right? Okay, so the next part of it, okay, talking about the software supply chain risks. So there are risks associated with your third parties. Now, when we talk about like your software, so when I say software, so think about it like anything like your source code, right? Like on which the backend on which your applications rely, right? So that particular source code could also be vulnerable to different attacks, right? And it also depends upon, let's say, if you happen to use an open source package or open source code into that source code, you don't have you aren't you don't have necessarily visibility into what that open source code is, right? Like is that source code free from vulnerabilities, or is that not making your own source code vulnerable? So all these things have to be taken into account. And how do we do that is we do tend to run like scans. So your scans, again, it could be different types. Your SAST, which is your static application security testing, your dynamic application security testings, and then comes your software composition analysis, which is your SCA, right? Your SCA essentially tests for your any, like, do your open source packages, do your open source libraries, do these have any outstanding vulnerabilities that needs to be addressed? So for example, one of the tools used there is like Sneak, that does a pretty good job. Your SAST and your DAST together provide the comfort level saying that yes, your source code is free from any of these underlying vulnerabilities. Static application security testing, what it does is you have your source code, it tests your source code line by line individually. If you have got 10,000 lines of code, it's going to run through each code one by one. Your dynamic application security testing, DAST, for example, pen test, it tests your application during the runtime, which means that it doesn't necessarily go through the individual lines of your source code one by one, but tests it from the outside, saying that okay, what are the vulnerabilities or what are the loopholes that we can see, or how this particular application can be exploited, right? Your container image vulnerabilities, compromised packages, corrupted packages, or sabotaged packages. Again, these are the different ways in which the hackers or the bad person can actually think of injecting the like malware or any other like vulnerability within your source code. So yeah, I have some interesting statistics here on the screen. So Sneak, they conducted a search in 2022. It was part of like this particular report is openly available. This is the open source supply chain security survey, and I just want to emphasize the importance of software supply chain risks, or rather, like how important it is to manage these risks. So 24% of the organizations, they are confident in the security of their direct dependencies, right? Like, which means that the open source software that they use. So it's like a good percentage of number you can see that they don't think, or they don't have enough confidence like to use the open source software. Then 68.8% is the average dependencies per project. So that's also an interesting number. Like more than 50% of your organizations, they do have dependencies, right? That 18% of organizations are confident in the security of their transitive dependencies, and then 59% of organizations report that the open source software is somewhat or highly secure. So pretty good figures in the sense that yes, they are kind of like they act as an eye opener for us, like what is the current state, where the organizations are, what is the comfort level when it comes to, yes, can we secure or can we not secure, or like are we comfortable to use the open security software, right? So talking about how do we protect the software supply chain. So first things first is, yes, you do definitely want to take a complete inventory of your software supply chain, right? Having an inventory. So look out for look out for this term. This is known as a software bill of materials, a very trending term. So what this gives you is how in my source code, what are the open source packages, what are the open source binary libraries that I'm using, right? And then assess your dependencies for security risks, which necessarily means like running the scans, running a software composition analysis, and addressing any critical as well as high vulnerabilities, right? It's preferable that you tend to use packages which are safe, reliable, which have been scanned, rather than using anything which is out there in public. So that's one of the, again, like one of the best practices, one of the recommended practices, right? Use lock files to lock the dependencies, which means that if you are using version 2.3, you have it like digitally signed and that's it, right? So that the developer does not have the ability to download 2.4, 2.5, and then use it directly in their source code. Then obviously you do want to integrate the vulnerability scanning tools, use signed images, and then use trusted registries for your container images, right? So again, these best practices, these measures, they could help contain that, they could help ensure that whatever open source packages, open source libraries that you are using, they are secure and they don't introduce a further vulnerability within your source code. So next part of it is, let's just say, cloud shares consideration. So when we think about third party, when we think about software supply chain, a part of it actually is like if I have outsourced a part of my business to the cloud, right? Like what if my data resides in the cloud? Like do I have visibility into what are the security controls I have there? Do I have visibility on how my data is being shared, or how my data is being kept, or how my data is being accessed in the cloud, right? So a few things to talk about it here would be, let's say if we talk about interoperability and portability, right? So what that essentially means is, am I relying on a vendor too much that it's impossible for me to move out of this vendor? So essentially there is a term called as vendor lock-in. So am I dependent my technology, my platform too much on this vendor so that I cannot move to a different vendor? So that's what this essentially means. Reversibility, let's just say I want to move over to a different vendor, I want to switch the vendor, what are my options there? Availability, security, privacy, again, do I have necessary controls at the vendor end, like in the cloud, right? To ensure that, yes, I'm compliant, my data is safe, my data is secure, and then there is enough logging and monitoring, enough incident response, enough logging and monitoring in place to ensure that, yes, I do have access, I do have, my data is protected. Maintenance and versioning, performance, governance, as well as resiliency. Again, all these go hand in hand with each other. You do want to, when you are contracting out your services to any of, let's just say, third party, or if your data happens to reside in the cloud, you do want to have a minimum of like service level agreements. And what that essentially means is your uptime, your downtime, what is going to be the SLAs, what is going to be the timelines during which you expect the services to be provided or the problem to be resolved. All these things have to be discussed. The reason being, if there is a delay, if you aren't sure like what kind of data, what kind of controls do my cloud environment has, and if there happens to be a data breach, you are going to lose the customer trust. It's your reputation, it's your business that is going to get damaged, right? So at the end of the day, you are going to lose the money, your business is going to be in jeopardy. So it's important that if you are outsourcing it, if you are ensuring that your data resides in the cloud, you also do your due diligence to ensure that there are sufficient security controls in the place at the cloud. Multi-tenancy. So this is one of the interesting concepts, and actually, it's one of key security risks. So what does multi-tenancy means is, let's just say my data happens to reside in public cloud, right? Now that cloud is accessible by other organizations too. Those other organizations or the companies or the different sectors, these are called as like tenants, right? Now, is there a chance that my data can be accessed by these different organizations or these different tenants? What are the data security controls, data access controls I have in place to ensure that other tenants don't have visibility over my highly confidential data? The second aspect to it is, let's just say, even if there are like data access controls in place and that public cloud, it lacks proper segmentation, which means that the other companies, the other tenants, they are kind of like storing their data onto this particular public cloud as well. What is actually preventing commingling of this data, right? Like, is there proper network segmentation, is there proper isolation, do we have proper separation controls in place to ensure that my data does not get mixed with some other tenant's data? So all these things have to be thought about when, let's just say, you are kind of outsourcing, you are engaging a third party, and that third party uses cloud as one of their like to store the data or to do their business processings, right? So this is again an interesting figure. It has been taken from the 2022 cloud security cybersecurity report, cybersecurity insiders report. So if we talk about the biggest security threats in the public clouds, like 62% happens from the misconfiguration of the cloud platform, right? So quite important that you take this into account as part of your vendor assessments. Then 54% is because of your insecure interfaces or your APIs. Again, we are going to do a little bit of deep dive into the application programming interfaces because as I said, your data aggregators, your link to the other financial institutions, these all rely on API. There is application programming interfaces which is doing these communications. So if nothing is securing that API, yes, your company data then stands in danger. Your highly sensitive data is prone to a cyber attack. 51% is relies on exfiltration of 51% of incidents happen because of exfiltration of sensitive data, that 50% for the unauthorized access, 44% for the hijacking of accounts, and then 39% for the external sharing of data. So all these numbers, all these statistical analysis, they does speak to about how exactly it's how why is it important for us to vet our vendors, like especially in an insurance industry, if we have outsourced it to a third party. And then especially if we are taking like cloud consideration comes into picture, why is it important to ensure that yes, we do have necessary security controls there. So talking about, again, this is not a comprehensive list, talking about some of the best practices, right? So choose and establish secure cloud provider, your Azure, your Amazon, your Google Cloud platform, right? So definitely choose one which has been vetted. Understand the security and compliance responsibilities, and then harden the security and access. So you do want to ensure that they follow the best practices. There's hardening controls applicable. They harden the infrastructure, and then there is regular scanning done. Understand data encryption for your cloud provider, quite very important. How you are the data in transit, the data at rest in the cloud, who all have access to the data management, the data security controls in place. Kind of want to get an understanding of all these things. Develop policies and training, and then continuously audit access and usage, right? Because threat landscape changes, there is continuous evolvement, so you do want to ensure that you continuously audit the access as well as the usage. And then respond to security issues, like what is the incident response process there, how long does it take to resolve an issue, attend to an issue, like especially if the issue is related to your data breach or your data loss, how effectively they can contain that particular incident. Okay, so talking about your API, application programming interface, again, I have pulled out these statistics just to emphasize how and why does API security matters, right? Your application programming interfaces, because they carry like sensitive data. They are responsible for, they are like the interlink between your application and, let's just say, your backend, your database, or they usually, like, everything relies on your application programming interfaces. So if the security of these APIs is not taken into picture, yes, there is a good chance that your highly confidential data stands in jeopardy. For example, in 2017, there was a personal data breach of 148 million consumers, which was exposed. That was part of your Equifax. In 2020, it was Clubhouse, where you had 1.3 million user records. It was scraped using a public API. And then I think the last one in 2021, which was the LinkedIn breach, that reportedly exposed 92% of users, including their inferred salaries, just because it was that the API that they were handling, it was not secure, right? There was not proper security controls around that application programming interface. Some other, analysis that has been pulled from the 2022 API Security Trends Report. Poor logging practices for the APIs, problems in API authentication, like do they have secure authentication, misconfigurations in your API, unnecessary exposure of data. So this is very important. Like if your API is exposing the data publicly, especially when it comes to highly confidential, inability to monitor the API for these attacks, and inability to rate limit the API responses. So all these kind of like form your top API security issues. The 41% of organizations, they had an API security incident in the last 12 months. So looking at the statistics, yes, it's close to like 50%. Hence, API security, it's quite important. So how do we tackle, or how do we mitigate this risk? How do we ensure that the API, we have enough API security in place, right? So one of the things to keep in mind, again, I would come to, I would take up this case study, but your legacy security testing doesn't work for the modern apps and APIs, right? So it's essential that you regularly test your APIs. You ensure that your external facing API, they are not exposing any of the highly confidential information out to the public, right? Understanding the attack surface, your threat surface, like how exactly your API can be compromised, and then what are the security controls or the defense in depth that you have implied on to secure your APIs. Data flow and risk drives modern application security. Continuous learning and production informed testing make security more relevant, right? So it's quite important that you engage the necessary set of teams when exactly you are designing these solutions, when you are building these solutions, and when you are taking into account your application programming interface, your API security. Speed and DevOps lead processes are paramount. So I would be touching upon your DevOps or your DevSecOps in a bit. Yeah. So one interesting concept is your DevSecOps, and what this essentially stands for is your development, security, as well as operations, right? So usually, let's just say when you want to make enhancement to any applications, any of your software products, right? So it's a collaboration of different teams, right? And there are too many security checks implied. Like, for example, do you have the necessary scans? Do you have the necessary pen tests? Like, is this impacting your business continuity, your disaster recovery, right? So all these things. Now, the concept of DevSecOps is whenever you want to release something into production, you build a pipeline. You have those security checks in place automatically, so that once the developer pushes it, these particular security gates or checks gets triggered. And if any of these fail, which means that if there is like any high vulnerability reported, that particular enhancement or that particular piece of code does not go into production at all. So this is the whole concept, is that you have automated it, which means that instead of doing these manual checks, you have automatic checks within your pipeline to ensure that there is a smoother delivery of your particular enhancement to the production environment. This is the whole concept where DevSecOps is like built. You have continuous integration as well as continuous delivery, right? Continuous integration. So think of it that yes, your developer pushes the code through the pipeline, and then it's continuously validating the state of a code base through those automated testing, right? And it's best achieved through the integration with your version controls. Your continuous delivery is that once these automatic security gate checks are like passed, the software is kind of like released into production. So when we talk about these security checks, right? Like, what are these different security checks in place? If we talk about this, again, I won't go into the in depth of it, but this is we call this as an infinity loop. Essentially, what this is it shows you the different stages of your DevOps. Like, for example, you plan, right? Like, starting from I'll take it from the left, like starting from you build, you code, you plan, then you kind of like release, deploy, operate, monitor. So it kind of like goes in a circular loop there. Now, each of the different things, like at each stage, there are different security controls that can be embedded into your CI/CD pipeline to ensure that there is enough compliance and the product that you're delivering into production is secure. So it's good to maybe like as a topic for like self-research or like self-study. This is a good example. Like, this is one of the trending topics which we can take up to say, okay, yeah, like what are the different security controls that we need to have, and then how do we achieve automation of these security controls, right? So it's one of a great trending topics. And we talked about SBOM, the software bill of materials. So that happens in your release phase, which essentially means that, are you using any third party? Are you using any open source software? If yes, what are the vulnerabilities in it? What are the dependencies? Do you have a list of it? All that comes under your SBOM, which is your software bill of materials. So a few things to look at is, again, like these are just the explanations or the part of it which is covered. Your SAST, which we talked about, your static application security testing. So this is the technology that yes, you do want it to embed into your DevSecOps or your CI/CD pipeline. Software composition analysis, your DAS, dynamic application security testing. Then there are some ones which takes it, if we take the testing to one step ahead, there comes your runtime application self-protections, your interactive application security testings, your container image scanning tools. So all this to make it a robust, like DevSecOps, right? Like robust CI/CD pipeline. Then comes your cloud security posture management, your web application firewalls, as well as your bot management. So CSP and cloud security posture management. So this is one like quite trending topic, right? Like, which essentially means that what are the misconfigurations in the cloud infrastructure and how we can actually mitigate it. Again, some statistics that to show like what is the dependency on the open source, what is the dependency on the vulnerabilities, and how exactly what is the average number of days to take it to the number of days it takes to actually fix a vulnerability. Like 97.8 is the average number of days it takes to fix a vulnerability. 49% of your organizations have a security policy that addresses open source software. So, which is concerning, like it's just 50% they do not have kind of like a security policy in place, right? And then software composition analysis, your SaaS, are the number one and number two tools which are used to address your security concerns. So how does your shift left influence software development is? So basically what's happening as part of this pipeline is the overall, if we see at the overarching objective is what you are tending to do, what's your objective is, instead of having a software in production which comprises vulnerabilities, you're kind of mitigating that by ensuring that the vulnerabilities are addressed on the left side, right? Which means as soon as you push that software through this CI/CD pipeline, it has gates, it has checks. If there are vulnerabilities, it's going to address them over there. So you're kind of like shifting it left, essentially involving testers early in the critical stages of the program. It gives necessarily high importance to your testing the software to identify the bugs, and opportunity for the testers to design the test first and then allow the developers to take more ownership, right? So again, some of the best practices to ensure that yes, you are addressing software security or software development, you are addressing the vulnerabilities ahead in time. So coming to the conclusion, we definitely, like as a, if we talk about all these risks, if we talk about the ways in these could be mitigated, we definitely want to have a robust security posture. And what that means is we definitely want to ensure that our assets, be it like any applications, any databases, any servers, infrastructure, they have to be free of any vulnerabilities, right? And how we can do that is, yes, we can perform regular automated scans and then remediating these vulnerabilities in a timely manner. Any of our critical assets, we just need to make sure that yes, we do have defense in depth. And what that means is, yeah, there is multiple security controls, so that in case one security control fails, there is another control that can take over, right? That can protect our data. We do want to have security controls for our data security, access management, data backups, as well as authentication. And then we do want to invest in early detection and real-time monitoring as a, yeah. So one of the things is we have security controls in place, but are we also tracking, like are we also monitoring like that security control is operating effectively, or like nothing has failed, the threat landscape hasn't changed, or there is no anomaly, there is no deviation from the regular pattern, from the normal behavior? Like are we monitoring that aspect of it? So yes, we do want to have controls for the security monitoring as well as logging in place. And then last but not the least, I would say is, yes, we do want to make cybersecurity everyone's job, and we do want to learn from the past and evolve, right? Because yes, we do need approval from the senior management. Yes, we do need to have individual employees with hands-on delivery who are accountable to ensure that yes, these security controls are implemented. But again, if we look at 20,000 feet overview, all this is accomplishable only when we talk about like make cybersecurity. We have everyone contributing to it individually, and then looking back at the past lessons and probably evolving from that. So with that, I would just open the floor to, yeah, for the audience to for any questions.
Thank you, Parul, so much for this interesting presentation and for all this information.
Yes, thank you, Professor Islam. Thank you so much.
Well, let's take some questions. Any questions?
Everybody's burned out. We're at the end of the semester, Parul.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that explains it. Yeah.
I think they may be running out of fuel here.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, I totally agree. Especially the last semesters could be challenging, especially if like it's research and all. Yes, yeah. But there is like when we talk about cybersecurity, when we talk about insurance industry, they're like quite hot trending topics. artificial intelligence, how artificial intelligence can be used to improve cybersecurity. How does your DevSecOps, reduce the human interventions so that you can, deliver with a smoothlessly without any delays. I mean, zero trust is another like trending topic. So I think there's like ample of things to research, because I know that like the landscape and everything is like consistently changing. So it's quite good to see. Yeah.
You mentioned Chat GPT and whatnot. Are they using that for anything in the insurance industry that would raise cybersecurity flags for you?
Yeah, the chat GPT. So we do have discussions going on at this point that's blocking to block at the organization level anything that is being uploaded or shared as part of chat GPT, because no one is like monitoring as of this point, right? Like as an employee, nothing is preventing me to just share company internal data into that. And so yeah, there's like I would say discussions ongoing to have it implemented. And I know that across several organizations, it's the same thing that's happening. But yeah, it's one of a good one where we can see like it's a loophole where we can see, yeah, someone can easily breach our company data. Yeah, good question.
So, Parul, I have a question. So, lots of companies complain that some attacks happen because of the untrained and unexperienced internal employees. So, does AI like help in this point?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. So the use of artificial intelligence where it has the ability to provide that comfort level where we can say that yes, we have a robust security posture, that is still evolving. So which means like as of this, like in the coming, like as of the present state, we still have to rely on humans. We still have to rely on the training, the awareness provided by humans. Now, as artificial intelligence evolve, as machine learning evolves, as we do get these things to do our data analytics, to do automations, right? Yes, there is going to be less of human errors. There is going to be less configurations done by humans, more involvement of artificial intelligence in there. So we can definitely say that yes, it's a step towards enhancing, like it's a step towards ensuring that yes, we do have less vulnerabilities, more strengthened, robust cybersecurity posture. But the only thing as of right now is we are not there yet. So,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Any more questions? Any more questions? Okay, so thank you again so much, Parul, for this interesting talk, and thank you all for attending. And like I'm sharing in the chat area that our next InfoSec seminar will be on May 11. We will have a talk about like mental health and cyber security. So we wish to see you all again on May 11.
Yeah, we have two great speakers for that one. And thank you so much, Parul. It was a very interesting presentation that you made.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me over, and yeah, happy to
And I
contribute.
hear
Thank you
you're
so
going to
much.
start doing a little teaching yourself, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Started it mid-March. It's going good. I'm enjoying it. Yeah. On the evenings, it's in person, which is good. Yeah. It's just great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Where are you teaching?
Vulnerability management and cloud operations at York University in Toronto.